Hi team, welcome to the Girls Rugby Club channel. I'm Marika Penman. I'm an advisory board member, PR person and general busybody here at GRC. Today we have a very special guest. Rachel Malcolm, or Scotty as I know her, is captain of the Scotland women's team, a former teammate of mine at Loughborough Lightning where she still plays her Premier 15s rugby, and a lecturer in applied sports science at Nottingham Trent Uni. Rach made her debut for Scotland in a World Cup qualifier against Spain on home soil at Scotstoun Stadium in 2016 after taking up rugby just a year prior, having made the move from field hockey, where she also represented her country. She comes from a big rugby family with her brothers Donald and James also representing Scotland at age group level, and with James now playing his rugby at Seattle Seawolves over in the States. We're really lucky to have Rach join us today for a chat and importantly to open up a conversation about the realities of concussion in women's rugby. So Rach experienced quite a severe concussion while we were playing together actually, and I remember at the time thinking, damn it, I'm not going to be able to play with Rach this season. But it was actually quite eye-opening watching Rach kind of go through the process of returning to rugby and navigating life in between. So concussion is well known to those of us involved in contact sports. And fortunately, there are stricter protocols and better awareness of the risks generally within rugby. But until recently, not a huge amount has been known about the effects and especially sort of long-term impacts of concussion and particularly effects on women. Just last year, a group of retired men's international players filed a lawsuit against World Rugby, the RFU and the Welsh Rugby Union over failures to protect them from the risks caused by concussion. There's also a bit of research to suggest that women may be more at risk, and there are a range of factors that play into that, including our physiology, our hormones, and the level of support provided to female athletes. Former players like Nick Evans and Kat Merchant have bravely spoken out about their experiences. At the Girls Rugby Club, we even did our own research and found, probably not surprisingly, that overall, despite the risks, most women and girls are undeterred and still have a huge desire to play rugby and a huge love of the sport. But worryingly, it showed a big gap in support for girls, particularly playing at grassroots level. Some don't even have access to a physio or medic on the sidelines at games, and often detecting a concussion can be difficult. One of our primary missions is to encourage girls into the sport and to retain them. And for that reason, our role in this conversation is not to scaremonger, but to raise awareness and educate female rugby players so they can play in the safest possible way. So Rach, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Bit of a long spiel at the start. First of all, how's the knee? I know we're here probably to talk more about your head, but classic, you picked up was it an MCL injury in the Six Nations?
Yeah, it's actually doing really well. It's I guess one of the better knee injuries you can get, and it's healing really fast. So hopefully going to be back out playing pretty soon.
Nice. So I guess we'll take it back kind of to the start really. So similar to me, you sort of came into rugby from another sport, hockey. I guess at that point, how aware were you of, I guess, contact sport and potential, concussions, but other injuries as well? I know hockey's not exactly a gentle game either.
Yeah, the types of injuries I guess in hockey were quite different to what I've experienced in rugby. I had quite a few kind of stress related injuries like stress fractures or overuse injuries with hockey, but I didn't have any really kind of contact injuries. One of, I think, my first season for Scotland, I picked up a really bad ankle injury, and I remember like the pain that I felt. I'd never experienced anything like it, so that was like quite a rude introduction into rugby in terms of the injuries and stuff like that. But my awareness of concussion in particular coming into rugby was pretty poor. I hadn't really seen a lot of it in hockey. There's probably quite a few high profile cases that have come out of hockey, particularly GB hockey in the last couple of years, which I think has probably opened the eyes of the hockey community to the dangers of it. But at the time when I switched over, I really wasn't really that aware of it. And yeah, obviously had quite a big experience of it and what it can do to you.
Yeah, and so how did you actually come into playing rugby? Was it through a friend or something like that?
Yeah, so I obviously played hockey, and then in our hockey off season, my housemate took me along to play touch rugby. And some of the girls there were kind of really keen that I came and tried rugby with them. My season for hockey hadn't started yet, so It was actually my S&C coach at hockey played rugby for Lichfield ladies, and she convinced me to go along with her to their first pre-season session, and I was completely clueless. Literally had never even thought about playing rugby, and but yeah, no, absolutely loved it from day one, and that was it. I was kind of sold, and played rugby and hockey for the first season, and then stopped playing hockey and focused on rugby from there on out.
God, how did you manage balancing hockey and rugby?
I had to. Yeah, it was quite painful because I was playing hockey to a relatively good standard at the time. I was playing for Loughborough University, and so I would play on a Saturday for hockey and then rugby on a Sunday, and then we trained on a Monday night for hockey. And my coach didn't know that I played rugby because I would not be allowed to do both to start with. And so I used to like hobble through training on a Monday night to try and hide it. But halfway through the season, he found out because I picked up a bit of a niggle, and I had to tell him that I probably wasn't going to be playing hockey for very much longer. So yeah, it was a tough first year, but yeah, very painful.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to disguise rugby injuries, even just like bruises and things.
Yeah, like black eyes and whatever else. I was like, yeah, fell over.
Oh, no. Yeah, just a big night. Yeah. Yeah, can you tell us kind of what it was that you fell in love with rugby? I know, like, obviously Lichfield ladies kind of sounds to me anyway, talking to so many other girls that kind of started their careers there, that it was such an amazing environment.
Yeah, I think it's like a really cool environment because it's quite, I guess, an old school club in the sense that it's very kind of family orientated. And we used to call ourselves the Red and Green family, and it very much was that from like the second you arrived. And I remember, like, obviously I turned up and I couldn't catch, I couldn't pass, I couldn't do anything. I didn't know how to tackle, I didn't know how to hit a ruck or anything like that. But you know, from that first session, the coaches were like cheering me on. You know, I had girls there that had won World Cups and stuff like that, and they were all like giving me help and like trying to push me through and stuff like that. And I just thought that was such a unique environment. I'd come from hockey where, you know, you very much played at your level and you didn't mix in between, where I was like a complete newbie to the sport, turning up to, you know, a rugby club, which I didn't realize at the time was one of the best in the country, and, you know, training with some of the best players in the world. And, you know, they were just so helpful towards me and really like made me feel part of their family straight away, which I thought was so special. And I think that's what I loved about it. I loved that, you know, there was a place for everyone as well. I'd come from a sport where, you know, you really had to be the fittest and the fastest, and the way the game of hockey's moved, it's gotten faster and faster. So, you know, I probably dipped out at the right time because I am not fast. But I loved that coming to rugby, there was a place for everyone in terms of what your kind of strengths were and what you could bring to the game. So that was probably one of the biggest things that was pretty cool for me.
Yeah, I know I came from netball, and I just found, like, compared to netball and some other sports that I'd played, it was very competitive and you're always kind of fighting for your position, and you wouldn't really, like, other players wouldn't really help you along if you're struggling with something. But rugby was completely different. Even at a higher level, everyone's very supportive and wants to see everyone do the best they can. Like,
yeah, 100%. Like, I couldn't agree more. You know, although there is obviously that competitive element, obviously everyone wants to play, but everyone wants the best for everyone, which has really stuck out for me. And like, I think in the two teams I play for, obviously with Lightning and Scotland, we're always about, you know, being the best for Scotland or being the best for Lightning. And if that means, you know, someone else plays ahead of you and you help that player improve, like, then that's the best thing for the team. And I love that kind of mentality and that ethos.
yeah. And then you went to Lightning when the Premier 15s was established. You were there from the first season, weren't you?
I was, yeah, there from day dot, which was quite nice for me because I played for Loughborough Hockey for 7 years before I obviously stepped away for, I guess I only actually had 1 year away from Loughborough Sport. So then I had the opportunity to come back to Loughborough and play within one of the franchises there was a cool one for me, because I obviously, Loughborough is kind of home for me, away from home. So yeah, I've been there since the start, so seeing kind of the progress we've made, and it's been really cool as well to see lots of our younger girls, particularly this season, come through and play really well this season.
Yeah, and it seems like it's quite a club where some of the Scottish girls kind of tend to go as well. I know, like Rona and Bonner and things were there when I was there. Like, why is that?
Because I take them with me. No, joking. I don't know actually. Quite so. Myself and Bonner were at Lichfield together. we kind of started our rugby journeys together and our Scotland journeys together. So we both moved across at the same time. So we were at Lightning from the start. And then I think kind of gradually we, more of the Scottish girls were coming down this way, and we sold the Loughborough Dream to them. So they've kind of migrated with us, which has been really nice. It's nice for us to have that kind of Scotland support system that, because obviously there's a lot of traveling for us to go to and from camps and games and stuff. So it's nice that there's a little group of us that go back and forth. But yeah, I don't really know.
Well, it's good. It's not a bad thing.
Nope.
Okay, so coming into concussion, I know we kind of touched on it at the start. Can you kind of remember when your kind of first, I guess, exposure or experience of concussion was? Not necessarily yourself, but had you sort of seen anyone else get concussed? Or
yeah, I actually had a teammate at Scotland, a girl called Karen Dunbar, who had a really bad experience of concussion. She'd had quite a large number of them across her career, and she actually played the same position as me. So when I came into the Scotland setup, she was kind of who I looked up to, and that was my kind of first experience. And she actually had to step away from the sport eventually, just because of the number of concussions she'd had, and just from a safety point of view more than anything. And she wanted to go and kind of enjoy another sport where she didn't have that risk, I guess, which is totally understandable because she did go through a tough time. But that was probably where my eyes got open to the risks of concussion. And she dealt with it really well. You didn't really see it outwardly, how it affected her and stuff like that. And she was always like the strongest person around camp and stuff like that. So she was a cool human. But yeah, that was probably my first experience where I realized, this is a real danger in our sport.
Yeah. And at that point, like what sort of, I guess, education and things were you being given at Scotland level and at club?
I was quite lucky in terms of when I came into the sport that concussion was already, something that was being talked about. I probably skipped that kind of grey period where there wasn't as much research and much conversation around it. So we did have quite good education. I was always kind of, I guess, in the period where we talked about if in doubt, sit them out. And that kind of stuff. So it was pretty good in that sense. And we were always told that, if you had any queries, then take them up straight away with the medics and stuff like that. And we are really lucky in both the Lightning and the Scotland setup that we do have medics available to us, because I think it's a really difficult injury because you can't see it. So as a player, you do sometimes need to be told to stop, because you think, you broke your arm, you can see that it's not okay and you can't do anything with it. But with concussion, it is a little bit subjective. And I think, that's probably like you say with young girls coming through, where, raising the awareness of it is so important, because you do sometimes need to just take it upon yourself to stop.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we started doing some of our own research at the Girls Rugby Club into it, like I was sort of reflecting on my own like rugby playing days and thinking, have I suffered a concussion? And I actually have. Like, I remember playing a sevens tournament in New Zealand, but just like a regional one, and I got tackled, fell back and hit my head on the ground. It was very hard, playing in the summer and things. And it was really dazed, like, the kind of cartoon, like seeing stars a little bit.
Yeah.
Was blurry. Got up and rejoined what I thought was our line, was actually the opposition line. And
you see that quite a bit.
Playing in their team for like probably a good 3-4 minutes until someone pulled me back into our side. But I didn't get taken off or anything. No one said anything. And I didn't realize myself that it had been a concussion. And then, so I never did anything about it that night, went out and partied and drank and everything.
Of course you did.
Like, I just now look back and I think, oh, that's terrible. But
yeah,
you're right. It is sometimes the onus is on yourself to actually identify it, and that can be really tricky when you're in the heat of a game.
Yeah, definitely. And my first concussion was my worst concussion, and probably, for that reason, didn't really know that that's what it was. I kind of probably wanted to be told that's not what it was, and that probably led to some of the issues that I had off the back of it. But I think, in terms of like my learnings from that, I would just never risk it again. In terms of whether you think it is or you don't, it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah. Can you kind of talk us through that then? It probably makes sense for us to touch on that now. Like, can you kind of describe, I guess, the concussion, and then from there, sort of the journey afterwards?
Yeah, so it was back, I think, in pre-season. It was pre-season? Gosh, it would probably be around 2018, I think. And we played a pre-season friendly against Harlequins just before the start of the season, and I tackled someone with my head on the wrong side. So the player landed on my head, and I remember kind of being quite dazed, similar to what you said, and not kind of, nothing went through my head like, oh, I could be concussed here. I just felt a bit like, oh, and then I kind of took a wee second on the ground, and then my teammate came and like yanked me off the ground and pushed me back into the line. So that was kind of it, and I kind of carried on. And then about 5 minutes later, I think, the physio came on, and he was like, "Are you okay?" Like, and did all the kind of, I think what they call the Maddox questions, where they ask you, you know, who scored last and stuff like that to see how you are, and passed all those. And by that point, I was kind of like, I don't really know why he's asking me this, but apparently on the sideline, someone's dad had said that number 6 hasn't looked right since she took a hit about 5 minutes ago. So that was why the physio came on and checked me. But I played the rest of the game and I literally didn't really think anything of it after that. And it was only really that evening I really started to have quite a painful headache. And I was kind of didn't really think anything of it, but then the next morning didn't feel great again. So I messaged my physio and said, like, I think I might have hit my head and have a bit of an issue. So but kind of, I guess, due to maybe my symptoms not being too dramatic and they kind of came and went a little bit, we weren't convinced it was a concussion. So I continued to play for just over a week, I think, until I eventually said, no, I'm not comfortable. Like, my head is still giving me issues and whatever else. So after about probably just over a week, maybe 10 days of continuing to play, I kind of pulled myself from training and said, like, there's something not right with my head. I think I'm probably concussed. And after that point, my Scotland doctor kind of took over my care in terms of my return to play. And I proceeded to have headaches for, I think it was almost 5 months by the time I actually got back to playing rugby. They did get better, so I don't want to scaremonger and say, you know, it was terrible, but you know, it was a long period. And I think, you know, the biggest thing I probably take from that is to stop straight away when you have that doubt in your head, because I do think that probably did cause a bit of complication there with my headaches. And there was obviously a lot of kind of psychological stress that goes with that. I didn't deal with it very well at all, and I kind of, I guess, have learned a lot from that in terms of how I deal with other injuries now. I actually got concussed again. I think it was probably like 4 games after I got back from my first concussion. But I was pulled off as soon as it happened. It was in a Scotland game, so we obviously have the HIA, and I got pulled off because of how the tackle looked. I did it in exactly the same way I did my first one, which was good because I didn't learn. I don't do that anymore. My head is always on the right side now. But and because I was, well, not necessarily because, but that concussion recovered after 2 weeks, which was, I guess, for me, pretty eye-opening in terms of how important it is to recognize it early and pull yourself from that situation early.
Yeah. So I mean, thank God for that dad, whoever saw that you were.
I know. It was Joe Brown's dad, actually. We'll give him a shout out.
Yeah. So, like, when you say that, you know, they initially asked you a couple of those questions on the field, like do you look back now and think that that's still a good sort of process to go through, or do you think it needs to be a bit more?
I would love to see HIAs and stuff like that brought into the women's game in terms of the club game and going down, where players can be taken off the pitch and a more extensive evaluation is done, because that's what happened when I played for Scotland. You know, after I took the initial hit, I was allowed to play on, but they watched it back and then they recognised that, you know, she kind of did look a little bit like she might have been out of it for a wee second there. So then they pulled me off. They do the extensive evaluation and they deem you not to be fit to go back on, which is, I think, absolutely brilliant. You know, I'm so grateful that they kept me off, because I probably would have stayed on. And that happens a lot. You know, you see a lot in rugby, you know, players looking really angry when they're getting yanked off the pitch for an HIA and then they feel it. So they obviously were concussed and you just don't realise as a player. So, you know, I think the Maddox questions serve a purpose. You know, it's moving in the right direction that they are assessing us, but, you know, you some of those questions are quite easy often, and for some players it'll be easier than others and stuff like that, and it's not foolproof. So, you know, I would probably like to see better protocols put in place going forward, and I think it will move that way. But yeah, it's tough, and I think, you know, especially now, and I've seen it more and more, they do seem to err more on the side of caution, where if there's any risk, the players are taken off, and I would say that's probably progressed over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Is like the whole sort of if in doubt thing, because so much better to do that, be safe than sorry. But I mean, in a game like rugby, like there's players on the ground all the time and for different reasons, and it's not always easy to see if that is because of their head or if they've just some other sort of niggle or something. I can't actually remember now because it was 2018. Like, I can't remember if we did baseline testing or anything like that at the start of the season.
I think we did. I think I've always had, whilst being in the Premier 15s, we've always had baseline testing. So from that point of view, that is really good, because then after a match you can be compared to your baseline, which I think is super important. Because then they can start to see, you know, sometimes as well with the concussion, some people don't even realize that they have no symptoms at the time, and then it's like 48 hours later. So that's where the baseline testing is really good.
Yeah, I remember doing it when I was in New Zealand playing in the Farah Palmer Cup, and just walking out of the physio room after my baseline test and thinking, oh my God, that baseline's going to be so low. Trying to like do the date, you know, the months of the year backwards and things.
Some of it is really difficult. It's my balance. My balance is terrible at the best of times, so I've not got a hope.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, you've kind of talked about, like, obviously that sort of 5 or 6 months return to play. Can you explain a little bit, because you were working full time as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, like the whole kind of like wraparound effects. It's not just us on sport. I mean, we're not fully professional athletes, are we? It's
I think for me personally, like that probably made the whole kind of period a lot worse. So I was out, I think, for about 5 months. And for that whole time I was lecturing and doing research. I was actually in the middle of my PhD at the time as well. So I was having to read a lot and write a lot. I was in the final year of my PhD. So it was quite a like stressful time from that point of view. And like, as initially I couldn't work. So for the first couple of weeks, and I was really lucky that my work gave me, I think about 2 weeks off to try and get better, which I thought was great. I was like, I'll be fine in 2 weeks time and whatever. And then 2 weeks came and went. I still wasn't much better, but I had to go back to work, and it was difficult initially, just concentrating. You know, I was sleeping a lot and stuff like that, so I just wasn't being productive at all. I got better at working and managing it and managing my symptoms, but obviously as you progress through that kind of return to play, you're obviously trying to tick lots of boxes to get back and stuff like that. And what I found as I was getting closer to getting back, you know, when I was working, it was almost like I had like a certain amount of kind of mental energy. So like my brain could only do so much, and if I did training in a day, then my symptoms wouldn't get worse. But if I did training and work where I like cognitively challenged myself, or had to concentrate for long periods of time, then my symptoms got worse. So the bit I found frustrating, particularly that last kind of month or so when I was trying to get back, was just like, I felt like I could probably progress through my stages quicker if I was only playing rugby, but I was obviously having to work, which I think probably did put that added stress and that added cognitive stress, which meant that, you know, because I was at work 9 to 5 and tiring my brain out doing that, then I would go to training and try and tick off the boxes from my return to play. And then I was getting frustrated with that and adding extra stress, which probably again was making my head worse. You know, probably the biggest learning that I took from my concussion was like not to fight it, because I was, every time I kind of got a setback, I would get myself so frustrated. And you know, it is frustrating having a headache. You know, when you've got a headache the whole time, you do get frustrated and angry and like irritable. I was very irritable for the whole time, and like I think that kind of psychological impact of it and like always having those setbacks and stuff like that made me worse, because I was trying to fight it and I was trying to, you know, I thought getting frustrated was the best response, but actually when I eventually kind of decided to just stop trying to get back and stop pushing it, that's when it got better, because I kind of took that frustration and that psychological element out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you were in your final year of your PhD, and like that is just insane now to look back and think that that's what you had to kind of battle through to. I mean, I know, like, simply just juggling full-time work or study and playing rugby in the Premier 15s is tough. I don't even know how I did it, like, just
Yeah.
one season. Um, so that is pretty amazing. Like, you must be pretty proud of yourself now to do that.
Yeah, I think, like, I sat my viva, so like I handed in my PhD, and then I sat my viva during that 5-month period, and that's like a 4 or 5 hour sat and get kind of grilled and asked questions. So when I came out of that, having passed, I was like, one, I don't actually know how I've done that, because my brain is not fully functioning at the moment, but two, like, gosh, if I can do that, like, I can get back and play rugby. Was probably, so yeah, no, I am proud that I got through it, and like, it was for sure, like, without a doubt, the worst time in my life, that 5-month period. The kind of mental well-being side of it, the effect it had on my whole life, because I couldn't really do anything. One of the worst things for me was being in a social situation, so being in a situation where people were talking. So like, I couldn't go into a cafe, I couldn't go into a restaurant, I couldn't really go and see my friends in any way. And at the start, I couldn't even go for a walk. I couldn't do anything. So you go from having this like really busy life, you're working, you're doing PhD, you're socializing, you're playing rugby, you do all these things, to actually, you can't even be in your rugby environment, let alone play and see your friends, and you can't socialize at night time and stuff like that. So from that point of view, I really struggled. I struggled because when I usually get injured as well, like, my go-to is just like lock myself in the gym, smash out my rehab, do everything I can to get back. And like, whereas with concussion, it's almost the opposite. It's like, you need to stop yourself from doing that, and you can't actually do anything to make it better initially, which took me a long time to get my head round. So I was just sat at home, frustrated with like these headaches, couldn't do anything. And from a mental well-being point of view, it was just really, really tough. I was super irritable, so I was being really mean to everyone, which also made me feel bad. And so there was just like, the knock-on effects of concussion is mental. But like I said before, I think I got to a point, I think about 4 months in, where myself and my doctor, because we tried to do the return to play so many times, we said, if we don't get back in this period of time, we're going to have to just call this season, because we're putting you through too much stress mentally, but also from your brain point of view. And that was like literally the calmest I'd felt the whole time I was concussed, because we'd just taken that pressure of trying to get to, because I was always thinking, I've got a game, and if I can get my return to play, tick this box, tick, then I could play this game. And then that game would come and pass, I'd get frustrated and I'd be angry and whatever else, and then be like, right, if I get it ticked off by this point, then I can play this game. Then when he turned around and said, look, Rachel, like, I think we need to call this season and just, start fresh next year, and hopefully your head will be better. And I was so at peace. I was like, oh, like the pressure of just trying to get back and like whatever else. And then my head got better. And it was like, the learning I took from that was like, don't fight it. Just like, stop putting the pressure on yourself to always get back, and just let yourself heal. And like, I think that's been something I've taken into, like, with all my other injuries that I've had ever since, is just like, you'll get back when you get back, and not to put that massive pressure on yourself that, there's a date in mind. And even with my knee at the moment, like, there's a date in mind, but in my head, I'm also like, well, if I miss that date, there will be rugby in the future. And it's about like looking after yourself from a long-term point of view, which is the most important thing. So yeah, it was a tough time, but lots of like really, like, it sounds mental, but I probably wouldn't change it, because I've probably learned more from it than anything else in my life.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, like injuries and things like that, those are probably the hugest learning curves in your careers, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like, it's so interesting to hear you say that, because it is so hard when you're a goal-oriented kind of person, and you have like set yourself these, like timelines and things like that, to actually take a step back and almost like release a little bit of that control.
Yeah.
And
because you kind of don't realize like how much it holds over you as well. Like, when you've got a goal in the back of your mind, and I know what it's like with like even things like with Scotland at the moment, we're looking towards our World Cup qualifiers. I don't think there's been a day in the last 4 years that I haven't thought about World Cup qualifiers. So like, but like when it's something like that, where it's your head and you need to actually let your brain just chill and switch off, it's actually really detrimental to have that goal kind of thing in the back of your head. So yeah, it's difficult.
What about, like, you've spoken just there about like kind of the relationship with your doctor and kind of having those chats, but what about like family and like what were your mum thinking, and like, even your brothers obviously being rugby players too, like?
Yeah, I first of all, like, my doctor was unbelievable. We FaceTimed pretty much every day for 5 months, which he's like a super busy big time sports doctor, so he was my absolute lifeline in that situation. And I quite often said, like, while I was recovering, like, how much, like, it must be difficult for younger players who don't have that access, because I don't know what I would have done without him in that time, both from like a just being there to be a shoulder to cry on a lot of the time. But my family took the brunt of my headaches, as did my partner. As I said before, I wasn't the nicest person with, just like having, like, I had like a very much like a kind of headache across the top of my eyebrows, which is really frustrating because you could always feel it just there. So they were there for me 100% of the time. My mum and dad found it hard because I live in a different country. I mean, not far away, but they couldn't pop round and see me, and lots of our conversations were just over the phone, and that would, they would only see and hear the bad side of me. So I was very thankful to have them there, and that they didn't abandon me by the end of it for being such a kind of terrible daughter, and the same with my partner. But yeah, I think those relationships are so important. And my brothers, having played rugby, neither of them have actually had particularly bad experiences with concussion, but obviously they've seen people who have, so they were very understanding and good people for me to talk to and stuff like that as well. But no, you realize how amazing your kind of family and friends are in times like that, where you just need kind of that people to moan at and take your frustrations out on, and they'll be there all the time. So I think that is important as well.
Yeah, those people that obviously know that you're not yourself, and
yeah
they're not going to just leave you.
Yeah, well, that was like, actually, when I first got diagnosed with the bad concussion, was my partner was very much saying she's not herself, like, she's sleeping halfway through the day, like she never sleeps usually, let alone in the daytime. So I think, like, that's important as well, like, you listen to other people and take on board that people will pick up on stuff, particularly on the pitch as well. I've had teammates who they've turned to me and not known a call or something like so basic, and I've been like, that's not right, and then that's been flagged to physios. And I think that's important as well, not to get annoyed about those situations, because that's your teammates, they're looking out for you, and they know you really well, and those little signs that they'll pick up on, you probably wouldn't pick up on when you're in that kind of concussed, adrenaline fueled match mindset. So yeah, I think that is a big point as well.
Yeah, that teammate thing is really important as well, isn't it? Like, because particularly at that grassroots level where there's not necessarily the kind of sideline support, if you know your teammates well and you can kind of identify those things where they might not be able to.
Yeah, no, so important. And like, I think, like I said before, like, you see it so often, people are just so mad that they're getting taken off the pitch and stuff like that, but those are symptoms. And you don't realize that some of your symptoms, at the time, you aren't aware. And like, I remember the second concussion I got, I came off the pitch and I kind of was confused while I was getting taken off the pitch, and then actually I sat down, the adrenaline kind of went away, and I couldn't remember which half of the game we were in. We were in the second half, but I literally could not remember being in the changing rooms at half time. And I think, had I not been taken out of that kind of match environment and stuff like that to sit and think about it and realize that I had symptoms, I wouldn't have realized. Whereas, there's some signs like being angry or being really upset that your teammates would pick up and be like, Rachel's not usually like that maybe you wouldn't in that environment. So I do think it is super important to listen to your teammates and your coaches who might notice those things.
Yeah. I mean, now that we are hearing more about potential long-term effects, and like there's a lot of like former players and things that are speaking up about it, like, what are your kind of thoughts around that? And yeah, I mean, is it something that you're concerned about? Or
I'm not concerned about it from the point that I've always been in rugby while we've had quite good protocols in place. And I think that's really important. I think the fact these players are speaking up is important, because back then we didn't know enough. I don't know whether, we didn't have the research then that we have now. And I think, you know, if we weren't acting now on the research that we have, then that would be bad. But I think the positive thing is that we are seeing change. We're seeing change in the protocols, and we're also seeing change in the way the game's being played. You know, you look at how people were tackling like 20 years ago, and I'm literally like, I'm so glad I didn't play rugby then. Literally. And like, my dad was a rugby player, and I hear stories that, you know, like how they like beat each other up on the pitch and all this stuff, and I'm like, and like just like dirty play and stuff like that, which you just don't get now, which I think is so important, because even though, you know, they all say, oh, it was better in the old days and all this, but equally I'm like, well, no, because we are now protecting players, and I'm super passionate about that, and I'm really passionate about the way the rules are changing as well to protect players. So I'm not worried about it, because I think we're really moving in the right direction. I do feel really bad for players that played in the era where, you know, we didn't have more kind of rules which mitigated so many head knocks and stuff like that. And I'm really grateful that we now have the knowledge that we do around concussion and the long-term effects as well. But I think the way that we're dealing with it in the game is getting better and better, and I really do hope it keeps going on that trajectory.
Yeah, I remember it's quite exciting, the amount of research that's being done, and when we were at Lightning, I remember them talking about taking part in a study where they would take a sample of your saliva, concuss and things like that. Like, what, are you aware of any kind of like particularly exciting research or anything really interesting that's been done?
I think there's quite a lot of research at the minute that's looking at like the difference between men and women, which I think is important, because from like the initial research that's come out, it is actually that women, I think, are something like 4 times more likely to have like prolonged symptoms. So similar to what I experienced, in that I was obviously had headaches for a long period of time. I think women are much more at risk of that. So they're kind of now looking at, why is that? And, you know, is there maybe a time in the month that women have a kind of higher risk of kind of concussion or these longer symptoms and stuff like that? So which I think that's really important, because we are very different to men in our physiology and stuff like that. And if there's something they can do to protect us better, that's brilliant as well. So I think that's cool. I don't know a huge amount about what else is going on, but I know that it is very much like a hot topic in the sports science world at the moment, which is brilliant, because I think the more we can learn about it, the better we can protect against it, and also kind of help recovery and stuff like that.
I use the Fitter Woman app, and I've definitely noticed, like, a particular time in my cycle, my balance is a bit just like standing up and walking around, like it's so fascinating now that I'm just more, like, I guess, cognizant of it. Start picking up those little markers, I guess.
Like you say, like, I think the research like Georgie and Jess and people like that are doing in that area is super important for us as female athletes. And because, like I say, there's so many things which, you know, hormones affect, and even if it's like injuries and stuff like that, like there's so many bits and bobs that we can help us prepare better for and recover better for.
I mean, obviously, you and I are quite keenly aware of the limited resources available for women's rugby. I know it's getting a lot better, and we're making like some really big strides. But how much do you think that sort of plays into this conversation? Do you think, like, compared to the men's game, you know, that are they better supported, or do you think that, for example, the England women's setup where there's like fully contracted players and things like that changes the situation?
Yeah, I think, well, like the obvious one that sticks out is the lack of HIA in the women's premiership. So that's, for me, you know, that screams kind of lack of resources. I think, you know, we see it in, I think even in potentially in the championship level for the men's game. I'm not 100% sure, but like all of the men's premiership and above obviously have the HIA, and I think that's massive in terms of diagnostic and protecting players. I think in terms of resources, the Premier 15s is excellent in terms of all teams have doctor and physio support in a full-time capacity. So from that point of view, I know from my experience, like I was really well looked after I got diagnosed with concussion. And I think that's really good. I think obviously when you're in a full-time setup like England are, and you see those players day in, day out, you know much more about them, and like diagnosing concussion is a lot about knowing a player, and I think that's really important. You know, if you're a physio that just pops into a club every so often, you won't know what's normal and what's different for a player. So I think, you know, we are definitely moving in the right direction. I would love to see it improve to the point where, you know, all levels have, or not all levels, but more levels have physio support and medical support, so we can stop kind of people going undiagnosed or playing for too long and things like that. But it does highlight it in terms of the resources, because, you know, I'm pretty sure that is probably the only reason that we don't have the HIA protocols. And as I said before, I think they're massive in terms of improving the recovery times.
Yeah, and particularly now that more games are at least being streamed and televised, like, you know, at least you have that kind of video footage as well if they need to review something.
Yeah, I think like the big thing is, I guess from their point of view, they probably need at least another doctor. So I guess that would be the sticking point at the moment, is that you tend to only have a one match day doctor who needs to be pitch side. So I would imagine they need at least another one. I don't know the ins and outs of how the HIA stuff work. You would probably need someone, an extra video person to be watching them on replay and stuff like that. But definitely that's where the game needs to go to keep pushing forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken a little bit with Dr. Stephanie Adams from Concussion as well at Edinburgh University, and also an organisation called Return to Play, which one of their I guess what they've identified is that kids that are playing at school are often playing a whole lot of different sports, or they're also playing for different teams, you know, might be playing for club outside of school and then for a school team. And so it's that kind of like disconnect between the teams where, for example, if they have something happen to them at a team practice, you know, at school, and then they're then going to play for club, there's no communication between the coaching staff. And so I think they're working really hard to try and connect the dots a bit. Like, are there any sort of suggestions or ideas you would have for kind of like grassroots level kids playing at club and school? Or
I think for me, like, don't be afraid to speak up. You know, obviously in an ideal world, it would be your coach or your medic or whoever it is that passes on that message. But even at the top level, you know, messages get lost, and you know, they're dealing with lots of players and however many in a squad. You know, if you know that you don't feel right, or you've had a knock at another training session, when you go to that other training session, speak up. Like, you know, tell the coach or tell whoever's in charge that you've had a knock on the head and you're not sure you're fit to train, and hopefully in that situation they will sit you out. And I know it's so tempting to always want to play and stuff like that, but it's so important to look after your head. And I think, you know, for the sake of being out for a little time rather than a long time, just take that ownership and be the communicator and take that responsibility.
Yeah, totally. That's the thing, isn't it? It's that you'd rather take it seriously at the time and only have maybe a couple of weeks potentially on the sidelines than months or whatever it is. What would you sort of say, I guess, to young girls or women that are playing rugby and they are reading a lot of the headlines and, you know, maybe getting a little bit worried about concussion? I mean, what would you sort of say to them, having gone through it yourself? And
I think the biggest thing for me is to like control the controllables. You know, we play a very high contact sport, and I think being scared to play it is not where we should be at, because there's so many things that are moving in the right direction in terms of making us safer and safer, but there's lots of stuff we as players can also control. So focus on those things. So things like, you know, tackling correctly. So, you know, if you are scared or you have those kind of worries in the back of your head, think about, you know, what are putting me at risk. So making sure that you tackle correctly, you know, trying to get things, making yourself as strong as possible, particularly around like your neck and your shoulder area, because those help prevent you kind of having that bad concussion effect. So like, don't be scared, and I think like that's the biggest thing. There's nothing to be scared of, but also don't be scared to sit out if you have taken a hit. I think those would be like my two big points. Is like, there's absolutely no point trying to be brave when it comes to hitting your head. Like there's absolutely no point. So don't try and be a hero. Take yourself off, even if you've got the slightest bit of doubt. It's just not worth it. So yeah, for one, do everything you can to control the controllables. So, you know, for me, like my 2 concussions were as a result of bad tackle technique. So I had my head on the wrong side with the player then landing on my head. So, you know, make a big focus on that. Every tackle you do in training, make sure your technique is right. And also tackling low, because, you know, the higher you tackle, the more likely you might go head on head with someone as well. So, you know, really focus on your technique, focus on your strength work in the gym and stuff like that to prevent any bad effects. Also, just do not be scared to sit out. There's absolutely no shame in it.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, concussion is something that it doesn't just happen, it's not isolated to rugby, it's something that happens in all sports and even outside of sport. It's a traumatic brain injury at the end of the day, isn't it? So it's not something that we can ever be kind of immune to.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, so like you say, control the controllables. I think that's really important what you said about like focusing on technique and even things like neck strengthening. Like I know that's you do in your training, isn't it?
Yeah, that's been pretty big over the last few years. That something they've brought in very much to protect, kind of, I guess, because a lot of the kind of concussions which happen are essentially because your brain is kind of rattling around in your head from the knock. But the stronger your neck is, the less likely that is to happen. So that's why that is so important in terms of like preventing, I guess, like that kind of whiplash effect that you would see in car crashes and stuff like that. So yeah, no, that's a big one in terms of what we work on. And we had a season where there were quite a lot of concussions, and as coaches they took that on board and they then kind of adapted our training so that we did tons of work on tackle technique to help with that as well. So yeah, there's definitely things that you can do to reduce your risk.
Yeah, nice one. And what about sort of a message to parents who have kids that are playing?
Yeah, I think, like, again, don't be scared. Like I say, like lots of things are happening to improve the way the game's played and also how these things are monitored. I think as parents, don't push any kind of child that you've got to go back too soon. You know, make sure you take the adequate time, and you probably know your child better than anyone. So in terms of kind of spotting if they are acting a little bit different, and obviously as kids we want to just keep going and going and going, so make sure, you know, you step in at the right times and pull them if they need to be, and don't be scared to do it.
Yeah, and I think what we said at the start about like the beauty of rugby and why we both kind of fell in love with it like far outweighs any risks involved. Yeah, it's such a special sport, so yeah, I wouldn't want to put anybody off.
No, 100%. And I think like one thing like I was so aware of like was how amazing it is in terms of like the teammates you make. Like I was so well supported by my teammates and stuff like that while I was concussed. And even still, like people still refer to that time when, you know, I was concussed and like how kind of good it is to see me come through it and stuff like that. So it's so nice to kind of see what you mean to your teammates and stuff like that as well. And I think that's what makes it so special. So don't be afraid to lean on that support system as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess what's next for you? Like obviously trying to get the knee back right, and then returning to play again.
So knee's not far away, so I'm kind of just in the last phases of my rehab, which is really cool, because we thought it was going to be a bit longer than that, so that's exciting. And then finish off the season hopefully, and then not really sure what's next. The calendar's been a bit of a mishmash this year because of COVID, so hopefully play World Cup qualifiers sometime in the near future, and crack on with that. So yeah,
you might be down in New Zealand then.
Hopefully if and when, but that'd be cool. And if not, maybe come and watch if we don't qualify, which would be cool too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Rach, for doing this interview, and I guess just speaking so like honestly and refreshingly about concussion, because I think there's a lot of like stuff floating around there, but it's really nice to hear I guess straight from you what your experience was, and that, you know, you have a really positive outlook, I guess, as well, which is important. So
thanks for having me.